every phase of this war, the president has tried to make sure that the Ukrainian military gets what they need. In this phase, the critical element is ground maneuver capability, and that means tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles. And so what the president is saying is he's focused on those capabilities, and the F-16 question is a question for later.
Yeah, that's the White House ruling out the possibility of sending F-16s to Ukraine, at least for now. That message from the White House coming as concerns are growing that China could start providing Russia with lethal weapons in its war against Ukraine. We want to bring in Andrij Dobrianksky, the Director of Communications and Media of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrij, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
So U.S. officials continue to warn about the possibility of China arming Russia with these lethal weapons. How would this escalate the war?
It's really more of a signaling thing from the United States. It's very clear they're saying they understand what non-military supplies may have crossed the Chinese-Russian border, but they want to make it very clear to the Chinese government that the kind of sanctions that have been applied incrementally to Russia can similarly be done to China. So they want China to be very clear that even though our economies are tied much closer than the Russian economy with the United States, it's still something that we can do incrementally, eventually closing off sectors of our economy altogether.
If China does end up supplying lethal weapons to Russia, would that meaningfully change the course of this war? Would it give Russia that much more teeth to operate with?
Well, Russia simply doesn't have any allies to support it. A lot of people have mentioned throughout the course of this war that that the United States has been supplying Ukraine, but it's really been an alliance across the Western countries that have been giving Ukraine military materiel. However, Russia, for its part, has been buying ammunition from North Korea. They have pulled their troops from Syria to go fight in Ukraine. But really, they don't have any allies to rely on. So the numbers game really isn't helping Russia right now, which is why they need to turn to China, and that is probably at their detriment for the future.
Okay, and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had this to say on CNN yesterday. Let's take a listen.
Beijing will have to make its own decisions about how it proceeds, whether it provides military assistance. But if it goes down that road, it will come at real cost to China.
Well, at this point, it now seems that China is urging for peace in Ukraine after this warning. What are your thoughts on this? Does China really want peace?
I think China would prefer peace simply because its plans are being interrupted by Russia making this flex and trying to make itself more powerful. Where in the future, I think China believes that Russia has no long-term future in terms of being a superpower. China would like to increase its power, soft power throughout the world, its Silk Road project, its ability to give loans to many countries around the world so that they are indebted to it. And Russia is kind of interrupting this. So, and oddly enough, at some points in China's plan, as were announced, are very similar to what Zelensky announced, which is why Zelensky didn't seem that perturbed by the pronouncement of some of the points when he was interviewed yesterday. So I think so long as we can agree on certain points, one point that both President Zelensky's from last September and the China plan says is that we should never have any military units deployed at a nuclear power plant. I think that's number one that the entire world can agree on.
Well, this morning, China is accusing the U.S. of bullying them with illegal sanctions, they say, over Russian exports. Is the United States stirring the pot too much by issuing these sanctions?
Well, I think it's talking about the potential of sanctions against Russia. There's no stirring the pot in terms of talking about this, because let's get back to what we're talking about. We're talking about a genocide that's happening, thousands of children being kidnapped into Russia. We're talking about UN rapporteurs documenting just in the first half of 2022 sexual violence against women as old as 82 and children as young as 4. This is a true human rights catastrophe, all based on the fact that Russia wants to recolonize parts of the world. There's nothing comparable to talking about stirring up sanctions when the entire world, as we saw, 141 nations voting at the United Nations last week, saying that Russia should leave Ukraine immediately. So it's pretty unanimous at this point.
Yeah. I was just speaking with U.S. POW Alex Drueke, who spent 3 months, in custody of the Russians, and he described firsthand the war crimes that he says he witnessed, not only on the ground as a soldier, but also, of course, as a prisoner of war.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider, and don't forget to click the red red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.